Hey, it's been such a long time since I made a vlog, and a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, based on everything that's happened in the last few years. But I was just moved to, not emotionally, not emotionally moved, but more something catalytic occurred that I wanted to comment on because I found it interesting turning it over in my mind, which was Ken Rosenthal being let go by the MLB Network, not having his contract renewed after really, if you read what he wrote about Manfred during the labor issues that were going on when the farce of the 2020 baseball season was attempting to live, attempting to exist, and the negotiations were ongoing between the union and the league, contentious negotiations at that. Rosenthal took a few mild jabs at Manfred and the league as that situation dragged on, and it's highly debatable whether they should have even played that year. We got a facsimile, we got a 60-game season in empty stadiums with strange rules that persisted for some reason going into last year that basically very few baseball fans enjoy, namely the 7-inning doubleheaders and the ghost runner on second base in extra innings, which I had way less of a problem with that due to the randomness of extra inning games for the most part. It's not a mystery when a team wins 99 games and they're under 500 extra inning games, and when another team wins 82 and they're great in extra inning games, to say it's random at times. So that didn't bother me as much. The 7-inning doubleheaders, I absolutely loathe the 7-inning doubleheaders. I do. In 7-inning baseball, talk about something, a theoretical construct, which in the light of reality withered for me, because I was actually intrigued by that concept, because I said to myself, the nature of baseball today, with so many hitters who can go deep and hitters willing to work deep counts, it's a different game than it used to be when pitchers used to rack up complete game shutouts in the 70s, 60s, back then, where you'd really have soft bottom of the orders with hitters primarily concerned with putting the ball in play and moving along whatever runners were on base via bunts or ground balls or fly balls. I think of the RBI baseball guy, in RBI baseball on like Genesis, hunched over in his stance and just looking to put the ball in play. Those guys were real for a very, very long time. Your light hitting middle infielder, center fielder, catcher, sometimes even third baseman, even sometimes even, which still exists. I mean, I've seen Tyler Wade playing third base. But the way baseball is today, dominated by the least subtle aspects of the game, it's hard for pitchers to really go deep like they used to in that effortless way, because so much effort's expended on every pitch. And I think that's what people kind of don't understand sometimes. It's not like managers simply take pitchers out at a greater frequency than they used to. Although I think probably in the 80s and in the early 90s and even maybe into the mid 90s, pitchers were untethered a bit more. If they had 95 pitches in the seventh inning and then they were rolling, they would throw 130 without anyone batting an eye. So things just change over time. But the thing that intrigued me about 7-inning games was, I was like, oh, you know what? Like, the complete game could come back, which would actually really help with the pace of the game. But it actually didn't do that at all. It just, a lot of times teams were just like, oh, we can just use our starter for like three and a third and go to our bullpen even earlier. So on that level, something I was intrigued with that concept ended up not really panning out at all. And the 7-inning games sucked. I really, it just didn't feel like a real baseball game, obviously. So I digressed there, and I want to get back to Rosenthal and Manfred. And I really think this shows Manfred is a bit thin-skinned. And in an unfortunate way, it again demonstrates that a league-operated apparatus like the MLB Network happens to be is going to be slanted, even if by the omission of a perspective that the league could find defamatory. And again, the league is defining that on its own terms, on its own network. So the interesting thing for me to consider is way back when, in a time, another time long ago, I was a print journalism major in college, and I always wondered if I should have done broadcast journalism instead, because I really do love sports, and I sit back now and I think, being a broadcaster would be amazing. And will be play-by-play guy, obviously. But I've had moments over the years where being, I do write, and I got into print journalism because I loved writing. I had a feeling when I was writing like it was what I was meant to be doing and exploring about myself, and that's why I directed my career goal in that directed that career goal in that direction. Obviously, I shouldn't be in broadcasting, but I pursued that. And yes, I did wonder, hey, should I have tried to be someone who calls games? Because I do use my voice. I am a musician, and there's a performative aspect to my personality, as there is for everybody, but there's one that's overt for me because I do get on stage and sing songs when the world isn't in crisis, as it has been. And I'm supposed to play on Friday night, and we'll see. I'm hoping to. But a thought would occur to me, being like kind of the positions I take, and less so the positions I take, just the mentality I have, where, I would have had to subvert a part of myself to be a broadcaster. Even if I was broadcasting high A baseball games, you're working for a company. I mean, your relationship to a team as a fan is economical in a sense, but that's not the reason why you persist in your fandom. It's because you have this connection to the team emotionally, and it can really exist that way for a really significant amount of the time you're invested. You're not necessarily going to sit there and say, like, how does this relate to me as an individual in capitalism? I mean, sports is like an escape from that. The economic models and the political models that were unavoidably, inextricably tied to due to the consequences of, our identities in the world externally. And, it's not something I shy away from. Especially as someone who's trying to be like an artist. Obviously, I thought a lot about it. I don't know if you've seen the Bob Dylan San Francisco press conference interview, but there was this guy, this really intense dude in a beard, mustache, did not look like a credentialed journalist, and questioning Dylan about his songs, and Dylan's like, hey, I haven't really thought about that, man. He's like, I've thought about it a lot. Well, I've thought about those issues a lot. And those are not, the need to comment on those issues, I feel, is kind of less akin to what I'm saying. If you are a broadcaster, the frequency at which you can critique the product, the method at which you can critique the product, when you're working for the company that owns the product you're critiquing, you don't have as much journalistic license, I feel, to be as critical as you might be. And there are things that come up that have nothing to do with team performance. Like when I was covering the Jets, when I was a reporter many moons ago, and they were on the upswing in 2010, very highly anticipated season. And you can look up that Mark Sanchez started the first 5 games that year, throwing 10 touchdowns and 1 pick and looked like he was going to be a Pro Bowl quarterback, and the defense was great, of course, in that team. I forgot the start they got off to. I think they at least got off to a 3-0 or 4-0 start, or 4-1, or something like that. I can't totally remember. I think they might have lost week 1 now that I'm thinking about it. I think they might have lost the Ravens week 1. Anyway, to show how being critical isn't necessarily all about critiquing team performance, Braylon Edwards, before they played the Dolphins that year, got busted for driving drunk. And the Jets, as a punishment, sat him for the first series against the Dolphins. And other than that, he played and didn't face any more significant discipline than that. And there were other aspects to the story that I don't feel like getting into, who he was with that night and what the implications were. I don't really feel like kind of getting into all that. Let's just say he was with someone who had an incident himself, I believe. I think that was the context for it. And certainly back then, I wasn't that critical because I was really inexperienced. And I really didn't have a strong take on that. And that showed that I wasn't, ready for that, ready to be covering a professional football team. I mean, because they eschewed any moral principle in order to win a football game, which is what college football programs and pro football programs do all the time. So I failed really in that instance as a young reporter who was in college to ask more questions and be more critical on that particular issue. I acted as if I was employed by the Jets, which I wasn't. And that's the issue there. Like, the Yankees could be 70-32, but some moral situation could come up where you really have to dig in and ask tough questions. I mean, any number of things could come up. A player getting popped for using steroids, anything can happen. It's life. They're human beings in reality. So many different things could come up. So, this is all a roundabout way of saying, and I'm digressing a ton, but in my fantasy of being maybe a play-by-play broadcaster, I've challenged it logically and, question whether I would be able to be that company man, and kind of avoid certain topics or gladly read the advertising copy, and play that role. And I'm certainly not criticizing any broadcasters who do that. I mean, they're making a very good living and calling sports games, and they're talented people. But we have to compromise in our lives. I mean, that's the nature of responsibility, and also power. And that's the thing about power. I feel like empowerment, the way people talk about empowerment and power, I feel are distinct. But really, the end of empowerment, I would imagine, based on the word power being in the word, is that the person has power and agency. And I think in the context of the times that I came of age, 2008, 2009, came of age as an adult and entered a professional world and live in New York City and operate in the city, to the degree that that we all are at the moment. The idea of empowerment and power being simple things used to accrue influence or property, had a lot of traction and still does. The simple narrative of what power is. So when you have power, what people often don't discuss or overlook in simple narratives of power is you have to be empowered by something. That's the way society works. I mean, the light bulb's plugged into a socket. And I think a lot of the times the way influence, if you want to use a different word instead of power, the way influence is presented is as something simplistic like that, as if the person is this high wattage battery, or this person is this high wattage light bulb that hasn't been plugged into an outlet. And I think this instance, again, is an example of that. There are, the word I'm looking for is there's a certain compliance. That wasn't the word I was looking for, but I didn't want to stop talking for a whole 30 seconds. And it's part of being an adult, but I feel like the presentation of influence and power, the marketing of power, and the reality of it are two very different things. So like when I imagine myself in a fantasy world being a sportscaster, instead of being someone who dedicated so much of my life to writing prose, which I have no regrets about because I love doing it, but it's just something you have to laugh about. Because it's a funny thing to do with one's time. Making art is a funny thing to do with one's time. We don't consider the realities of those arrangements, and the fact that the thing plugging me in, if I'm standing in a broadcast booth, very well lit, probably shaved, and probably not having this hair, but maybe, I don't know. Baseball broadcasters, I don't know. Take a look. It's kind of like a conservative image most of the time, which is pretty funny. But that's what I'm saying. Like, this is an instance where the thing that interests me about it so much is that the shots he took were rubber bullets, so to speak. They were not strong takes, really. They were critiques, and they were reserved, and they really were balanced. And Rosenthal, in fact, often will put the management perspective forward. At least that's what let me paraphrase, or let me amend that to say that is the impression I've gotten based on what I've read about Rosenthal recently. So the idea, we're living in this time of 24/7 news cycle. The Athletic is kind of on the cutting edge of sports journalism, because I feel like their model, while intriguing, and I am subscribed to it, isn't necessarily breaking the mold of sports journalism at all. It's kind of adhering to tenets of sports journalism. So take that for what you will, and I don't want to kind of get into a whole conversation about the Athletic. But this article was in the Athletic, and the league felt like it contradicted his position at its network that it runs. So what we are left with is an imperious emperor striking down an employee due to really mild criticism. And it's a circular thing for me, because for me, it's a lot of it too, from my personal standpoint, is you're looking objectively at something I really was hoping to participate in subjectively. So I can kind of look at sports media and journalists and the way they interact with the league in this, from this kind of perch, because I didn't get into the field. My career stopped after I got out of college. Basically, I couldn't get that thing going, and that's fine. I mean, that's me and many other people. So you pivot and you do something else with your life. But I think, hats off to Rosenthal for knowing he was an employee of the MLB Network and going there in the article, because that was a heated situation for baseball fans, for people who care about baseball, which we probably shouldn't do. We really shouldn't care about baseball as much as we do. But that situation in the midst of the pandemic and the way they were squabbling and not coming to an agreement, And the bad news kept coming out on top of real life horrific news. And if you care about baseball with the childlike zeal that you shouldn't as an adult, that was a really tough, heated time. And I can understand, why he took a stand and said, I am going to take a shot at the commissioner here about the way this is going. Because it was, if you cared about baseball, it was an embarrassment that they kind of couldn't, in a crisis, they couldn't come together and make a deal, which they didn't do. They played that season on a default deal. So, all that being said, I think I'm done. Main thesis here is that these relationships of reporters operating independently while also being employed by the league, and the close relationship between the league and the teams, which is they're one and the same, really. But the idea of you're covering the team and you're covering the league, but you're also, you do these guest spots. It's an interesting dynamic. It is. And they're entitled to let go of who they want. They are their own business. But they really lost a lot of credibility, I think, in this particular instance. And you're really going to watch a show like MLB Tonight at times and say to yourself, what are they not saying right now about the league? Think about this baseball thing with the balls. The baseballs, huh? The fucking balls being trifled with every season to the point where the data of player performance is now way less reliable than it used to be, because the ball is being messed with. And they had the brilliant idea last year, we're going to roll out this new ball that's dead and doesn't travel as far in the air for some reason, because the game's become too one-dimensional, and they suddenly thought players were going to become Tony Gwynn. In the course of the year, they were going to say, you know what, I really need to start, instead of employing the same approach I've used for years here, playing the game we've been playing, I'm all of a sudden going to be, Tony Gwynn, and I'm going to be hitting the ball to all fields on short notice. And the result was less power with the strikeouts that we've been watching incessantly for the past 5 years. So I could make another video about how I feel about the current state of the game on the field. I do have a lot of thoughts about it, and they're not all negative at all. I'm not one of these people back in my day. Although back in my day, there certainly was the ball being put in play a lot more often. That's for sure. So what I'm saying, I got off on another digression, is they're not going to touch that story because it makes the commissioner look bad. And even on a show like Brian Kenny's show, are they going to be, and I love what Brian Kenny does, are they going to sit there and say, using this ball was a disaster. They went back to the old ball seemingly in the middle of the year, and then they were using a mixture of the two balls. Saying balls a lot, and I'm like 12, so it makes me laugh. So that's what I'm saying. If you can't critique, things come up. Just like when I was covering the Jets and it was hunky-dory and everything was going great and they were 4-1 and Mark Sanchez was playing great and the defense was great. And oh my God, they might win a Super Bowl. This is so exciting. An issue still arose that I should have covered a lot better because this is life and that happens. So if the MLB Network isn't able to do that, then they're failing on a journalistic level, and they're not an actual journalistic enterprise. And, if in my fantasy life, if I'd be working for them right now as an analyst and enjoying myself, I also would be in the bag for Rob Manfred. So it's just interesting to think about life in that way. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and stay safe out there. I'm reporting from my job. I'm on break right now, but I'm in a building. I'm working in a building during this crazy situation wearing 2 masks. I'm not going to make that joke, but 2 masks. I am going to make that joke. I never thought I'd double bag my own face. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.